Great. Okay. Awesome. Well, we'll just get started, and then as people join in, we can keep going. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in, especially people in California. It's pretty early, but then we have people, yeah, from all over the world. So this is great. Yeah, we just kind of wanted to have this webinar to kind of get, give you guys some hear some feedback from you and kind of answer some questions. So I want this to be kind of informal in some ways. Let's just kind of get started. So the overall agenda is, I want to give a quick, let's just say, update on what we're up to, and then some new manuals and things like that we have going on. And then you guys can ask questions on the chat, and then after that we'll have a Q&A. Again, put questions on the chat. We have already 15 questions that were submitted to the registration, so we'll answer those first, and then we can get into the any questions in the chat. And the point is, yeah, for this to be very conversational. And yeah, hopefully you guys get something out of it. Awesome. Well, to get started, just wanted to provide some info on the new manuals that we have and videos. We will share these slides after the meeting, so we have all these links and everything. But we have some new manuals for the probe installation, a new video. We have also a video on how to install the sensors into places that have thick bark. So this is for forestry. We've been getting a surprising amount of interest from forestry researchers. So more to come on that. We have also been working on probe reuse. So we have a manual and a video that will help you kind of figure out how to potentially reuse the probes, move them around, that sort of thing. We're working, and we'll talk about this, on a small probe. Thanks to the USDA for a big award that we got recently. We got a phase 2, so that's really great. So we have a good amount of resources and some partnerships to develop small probes to be used in small crops and that sort of thing. And so we have a manual and a video. I guess you guys can definitely take a look. We're not really selling those yet, but I figured curiosity, it can't hurt. We also have some developments for using the sensor in walnut. And again, we have a manual and a video. We'll share those with you. But again, that's not for sale, especially the whole walnut thing. So we're still developing that. But again, it figured you could be interesting for our customers. All right, so just getting started. We've been working on a small probe. This has been funded with the USDA through an SBIR program. We just got phase 2 approved very recently this summer. So we're going to be developing this over the next couple of years. As you can see on the left side, we have the original sensor, and then on the right side, we have a version of the smaller sensor. So the sensor itself, the probe, is smaller, but also the way it's installed is smaller. And so we've been developing not just that, but also the way it's installed so that you can put it into really small stems. On the right side, you can see what we call the installation guide that just helps you kind of clamp the sensor into these smaller crops. And so then also thanks to our collaboration partners who've been helping us test these sensors, not just in the US, but we've also been doing some testing elsewhere as well. So now, just to get started on this, we've had some good results in grapevines. Take a look at the picture on the right side, top right side, right? That's one of our sensors with my finger for scale. We installed it in vines that were about 1/2 inch in diameter. And also thanks to some testing also with advanced viticulture in California. And the initial results are very promising. So here you can see what we're showing is the 2 sensors installed into the same vine for a month and a half. I mean, this trial is still ongoing. We started it earlier, but the data so far looks quite good. I think as we go forward, we'll keep doing testing of and validation with the bomb in grapevines. All right. And then also, well, just as an aside, this video is being recorded. And so we expect that we will have a link to this webinar in our website in the coming weeks. We've also been doing testing with Blueberry. Thank you to David Bryla for this data. And so, yeah, so the initial results were promising. The sensors agree. Again, we have two sensors installed in the same Blueberry tree shrub, and that looks quite good. Again, more validation is needed on that, but that looks very promising. And here I'm showing some of the better data we're getting, but all these things, right? We're not just trying to make it work one time in Blueberry, right? So it's all about improving the way it's installed so that these results are consistent, and so that third-party users such as you can use them and install them in these crops. Here I'm showing some sensors in cotton. We've done some collaboration with Duke Poly and Avacha. The cotton plants we haven't actually done installation ourselves, but our partners have. It seems to be a good market in terms of like we are getting interest in California. We learned somewhat recently that people do bomb measurements in cotton, and so growers have an interest in this. And so, but the plants are relatively small, and you want to get the sensors installed right away, right? So the smaller we can get the install to work, the better. We had some really great results in 2022 with Duke Poly, and we can share some of that data. But then this year we made the sensor a little bit smaller, and we changed some things, and we ran into issues where the data was not quite as good. And so that's something that we're still kind of developing. It seems to be something to do with the way that the sensor is kind of hammered or pressed into the tree, into the cotton stalk. But as you can see here, we were surprised to get like very negative values for cotton. But the sensors generally agree. I think we had the most issues happen when the cotton plants were really dry. Because then you run into more problems, drier and hotter. You run into problems with like temperature effects, which kind of an aside note, right? Our sensors in some way measure similarly to the STEM psychrometers, right? They should measure if everything was perfect. Our sensors and those would agree. The STEM psychrometers can work really well, but they run into problems because of temperature differences between the sensor and the plant. In our sensors, they work much better with these temperature differences, but it can still be challenging if you have very high temperatures. So I'm showing here a little bit of validation from I believe this is Luke Poly, could be wrong, but there was quite good agreement between the sensor, right? So what we're showing here is the pressure bomb is the orange line over the course of I believe this is a few weeks, and then the blue line is the sensor. So this was just amazing because Duke and his team took so many bomb measurements, which is just very impressive. And so then here the sensors are the graph here is flipped, right? So 0 wetter is at the bottom, drier is at the top, and so the stalks are kind of in a, let's just say, wet, well hydrated initially, and then they're kind of dry down for a bit, and then they kind of go wet again and dry down. And so the sensors again kind of capture this relatively well compared with the bomb, which is very encouraging. And again, these are relatively small plants, and so if it works well in this plants, especially at these like very dry, hot environments, then it looks very promising for other crops as well. So very recently, thank you to our plant scientist, Mary Rose. We did some testing in pepper. Also, thank you to Ken Shackle, professor from UC Davis, who's been our collaborator for many years and a collaborator in this. They just kind of contacted us like, hey, we got some pepper plants, and Professor Shackle has been doing some bomb measurements on, so Professor Shackle has been doing some bomb measurements in pepper, and it looked promising. And so then he asked us to do some installation. And so this started, less than a month ago, like 2-3 weeks ago. And it was a challenge. As you can see here, the plants are small. And so we had to tweak the way things are installed, but the data so far looks good. Again, this is just kind of the start of this kind of testing. But it's pretty cool, right, to see sensors installing these like more green type plants. Somebody mentioned, yeah, we probably want to use the term pressure chamber instead of pressure bomb. I think I agree on that one. Some of the other developments, we are doing testing in wet crops, what we call wet crops. So we have lots of interest for, particularly for walnut and avocado. It would be really nice to be able to get good data on this, but the challenge has been that when the sensors are installed normally in the trunk, they read well for a bit, maybe a few days, a week or two, and then there's some sort of wounding response from the xylem, it seems, that then blocks the sensor, and then it just reads zero. So we call these wet crops. And then we've been kind of trying out different things to like prevent that from happening. And the latest technique that we were trying seems very promising. This was kind of an idea from Professor Shackle from Davis. So again, thanks for Ken for all these really, really solid ideas. And so he basically thought, well, we can't get into the trunk, but maybe we can get in through the pith, because the point is that when the tree gets it gets wounded, it produces these exudates that then block the sensor. Most crops will do that, but it tends to happen in the phloem, right? So as you can see here on the middle picture, phloem is kind of on the outside, and then the xylem is where you actually want to measure the water potential. So so for most crops, we can deal with the phloem wounding response because of the way the sensor is installed. We can block that out so that the sensor can still measure. But it seems like in walnut and avocado, the wounding response happens in the xylem itself, which makes it very challenging to deal with. So the idea here was to actually install the sensors in the pith, because that way we could avoid damaging the xylem where we are measuring. The pith tends to be kind of dead tissue, believed to be dead tissue. And so then there what we do is we cut a small branch and then put the sensor right in that hole. And the results are promising. It's not perfect yet, but it looks much better than we've been getting for sure. And so this is kind of two sensors installed into the same walnut for let's see here, 6 weeks or so. We have seen good, relatively good results for a while. And so this is still kind of ongoing, but the installation method is a little bit more challenging than what we have currently. And you guys, if you take a look at our slides later, you can watch a video of how we do that installation. But let's see here. Let's see. So, okay, so question about this data. This is in the same tree. So, right, what we're doing, we're showing the two sensors installed into the same tree. We do this because taking bomb measurements is kind of painful, right? So it's easier for us to just install two sensors, and if they're both agreeing with each other, then the data is relatively good usually. But then, yeah, the next step will be to take bomb measurements. We have some trials of this kind of installation that we're doing with our partner Olivos Riego in Chile. So those will be starting out, I believe, this month. They already have the equipment, so they'll be doing that. And they will also be helping take bomb measurements. And the idea is that hopefully by the end of the season, we'll have some better validation of what this kind of looks like. So here we have the validation versus the bomb pressure chamber from Professor Shackle. And so on the, let's see, so on the left axis, we have the tensiometers. And on the x-axis in the bottom, we have the water potential measurements with the pressure chamber. So as you can see, I mean, there is some agreement. It's not perfect. And so we're still kind of figuring out how to improve the reliability and the accuracy of these measurements, but it's definitely a start. And so then also so we've been doing some testing in avocado. Again, this is very recent. So we just started this like basically a month ago. And so avocado has a similar issue as to walnut, where the sensors kind of measure for a bit, but then they stop. And so then the pith looks a little bit different, but we're kind of just drilling into it and installing the pith, and the results are, they kind of variable. So we're going to continue testing on that. It'd be really nice to get some avocado working, because we have lots of customers, particularly in San Diego area, where it gets really dry. And so that we'll see how that goes. So what's next? We have funding from the USDA to work on this. Right now, the growing season is kind of done, in this hemisphere. So we're doing some testing with our partners in Chile. We're also doing some testing in the lab with branches to kind of improve the sensor design and test it. We have some small sleeves here on the right side. So we're testing different sizes of the nose that actually gets installed. And the point is so that we want to develop this so that it can be used for very, very small crops and larger crops. And so we're kind of tweaking the way this is working. We're also going to be testing different things with the mating compound and that sort of thing, and characterizing the freezing response. We have lots of questions about the freezing tolerance for sensors, and so that's something else that's coming up, and just kind of making the installation easier. That's always very important to us. And also new crops. We have, as I mentioned, testing in the southern hemisphere. They're going to be testing walnut, avocado, blueberry, kiwi, wine grapes, small wine grapes. So lots of work there. We've had a good number of people doing testing in forestry, and the results so far look promising. So we'll see about that. And so I wanted to just share this. This is the kind of an updated crop list, I would say, of how the sensor evaluation different crops. And so if we just start from the left, we had great results validated against the bomb and everything for almond, prune, cherry, apple, and grapevines, larger grapevines. So those are like good to go, and we're currently selling those to customers, growers, and researchers. We have crops where it works, but sometimes there's issues, and so we're still kind of figuring out what's up with that. In pistachio, we had good results initially, but we have seen that at some point after a month or two, the sensors can sometimes go and read wet, like way too wet. So we're not really sure what's up with that. So we're testing on that. We've had good results in citrus when we test them internally. But then some of our customers have run into similar issues with the sensors read too wet. So again, we're kind of testing on that. And so then let's see, we're getting question on the have data on grapevines less than 2 inches. So we'll have data on the small vines. I mean, right now we are getting good data from our partner on these small vines through advanced viticulture. So we could probably share that even probably before the end of the year. We'll have something we can share. We'll probably send out a mailing list about that. But validated data against the pressure chamber, that'll probably be in like February, March. Our partner in Chile is going to be doing some testing on that. And so then let's see. Oh, we'll answer more questions a little bit later. But then, yeah, so initial validation, we have sensors that have worked relatively well, again, with little testing in pine, hazelnut, pepper, cotton, grapevines that are small, olive, fig, mango, blueberry. And then we have just kind of the experimental crops where it's still kind of being tested. So we kind of just recommend that to people that want to test things out more carefully, but maybe later. Let's see. And I just kind of, Brian, to bring this up, we have a soil probe. We have the tensiometers, and they've been developed to be used in trunks, right, for stem water potential. But we can also make a soil probe, right? So we are just developing it to see if there is interest. It's not really the priority of the company right now, but if you're interested in a soil tensiometer, that would be small and would have a huge range compared to what's out there, right? So a tensiometer that can measure water tensions down to 30 bars, then let us know, and then we'll keep you in mind for when we start things out. Okay, so with this, I think we can just start in the Q&A and just kind of go from there. I think, yeah, maybe just put the questions in the chat. And actually, let's just start answering questions on the chat, and then we'll go into the questions that we got on through the registration forms. So let's see. Met Allen at GESCO conference, New York in July. Their speech, he mentions, yeah, the sensors don't withstand winter very well. Recommended for replacement annual basis. Are they discounted? The sensor need, let's see. Just gonna double trunk grapevines. All right, so I'll take these questions. Yep, we'll take these questions one at a time. So given the question, cost involved, the replacement probes free or discounted for? So replacement probes, it's a good question, and it depends on how you buy them. So when we sell to our customers through subscription, this is what you're seeing here. It includes probes, couple probes, and then a data logger. Then with the subscription, there's a yearly cost, and that includes everything. So that includes the sensor replacements. So if you have a subscription with us, every year you get like a couple probes that then you can install at the beginning of the season and get the most accurate data possible. And so yeah, so those are just included with the subscription. If you're buying just individual sensors, then the replacements are just at the same cost as the original sensors. And you can try to reuse them, and that can work. We just don't guarantee it, and it's just because we are trying to make these sensors as reliable as possible. The challenge is that they are used in many different crops, many different environments with different users, and so it's kind of hard for us to say whether they can be reused in a specific crop in a specific way. So, and this kind of testing also takes many years, right? Because you're trying to see, like for example, can the sensors be left over the winter? And will they work well the next year? And it's kind of hard, you need to like leave them in the winter and have enough of them so that you can have a good representative sample. But on the winter question, I mean, the sensors, they can withstand temperatures down to 0 degrees Celsius, probably a little bit lower than that. But, we're not guaranteeing that. And we wouldn't recommend it. So what I would say is you can leave them over the winter if you want. They're going to measure 0 in most crops. But then I would not leave them over the winter if the temperature is going to drop below 0, because then they might freeze. We have seen sensors survive temperatures below 0 for at least a couple of days in New York. But again, we haven't done a lot of testing on this, and so it's kind of a question mark there. We are doing testing of the sensor freezing tolerance. So I guess we'll have more data on that soon. There's a question of like, do sensors need calibration before installation? They don't. So the nice thing is that the sensors are calibrated in the lab. We use a pressure system to do that, and then the measurements they give you are accurate and they are. It's like the actual water potential the sensor is measuring in the installation site. So this is not like some of the other instruments, like for example the andrometers, where it's kind of a relative measurement. Here we are giving you an absolute measurement of water potential. But that being said, the measurement is the accuracy of the measurement will depend on how good that connection is between the sensor and the tree. Let's see, double trunk grapevines. Are the sensors installed in one of the trunks, and does the resulting data mean half of what the plant feels? Well, so like any sensor, you install it in one place, and then you're kind of picking an installation site, right? And so you can't measure all the plant everywhere. But generally, the water potential is relatively uniform across the trunk, right? So on a grapevine, regardless of where you install it, you're going to get very similar results. That being said, you want to install it in the thicker and main trunk, because that is just kind of an easier install, and so you're more likely to get good results. But in a pedantic, more technical sense, there is a drop in water potential across the trunk. So as you expect that as you go from the main trunk towards the leaves and further out, water potential will be slightly lower, so more negative, drier. But it generally doesn't. Yeah, it varies very little. The biggest jump in water potential happens between, let's say, the soil and then into the trunk, and then also between the trunk, between the leaves and the atmosphere. Let's see. So what is the recommendation for installation on grafted vines? We don't have any specific recommendation there. What we recommend is probably just install it above the graft. But again, we expect that the water potential will be the same above and below the graft because they are hydraulically connected, and the resistance to water flow in the graft should be very minimal. Let's see. So we have what's the communication protocol on connections, SDI 12. So let's see. So we have a couple sensor types. If you buy the subscription, then that kind of all taken care of, and that just gets uploaded to the cloud through cell phone. So you need cell phone connection for that. So we have two sensors that we also just sell individually. We have analog sensors, and so those can be connected to any scientific data logger. Things like Campbell Scientific work well. Those you need a accurate voltage source and an accurate microvolt resolution, analog to digital converter. So so you need like a pretty fancy logger for that. Kind of more detailed, the sensors are a Wheatstone bridge with a 2 kilo ohm resistor. So that helps you, but a lot of these loggers, the scientific loggers, they have a method to measure Wheatstone bridges. We also have an SDI 12 sensor, and that has been validated to work well with the vast majority of things we've tested it on. And so then, so that's pretty easy to use. We recommend the SDI 12 because it is easier to work with versus having to kind of put in the calibration coefficients for every sensor, right? Because every sensor has its own calibration coefficient that we give you. But if you have the SDI 12 version, then that is already stored in the SDI 12 converter box. Another question, do you foresee integrating sensor data directly to irrigation controllers to allow direct irrigation control? So what Rod here is asking about is kind of closed loop irrigation, right? Where the sensor can basically turn on the irrigation automatically so that the human can be out of the loop. I mean, that's something that we'd like to try eventually, but to be honest, it's a huge undertaking because there you have to set irrigation thresholds, and then that also depends on the soil type you have, like how much you actually want to irrigate, and also when you have sensors like this, that there are just kind of unknowns that the irrigation system needs to know, and that you can't just measure, right? Like, is harvest going to happen soon? Do you have like some sort of pest thing that you're trying to control? Are you trying to do whole split now or later? And so this is where closed loop irrigation is something that might be done eventually, but we're just not focusing it right now because I feel like it's pretty important to have a human in the loop right now in case something goes wrong too. I mean, the sensors, they work pretty well, but they're not perfect. And also the irrigation system doesn't always work perfectly. The rat might have chewed through the tubing, that sort of thing. So we'll see. But that being said, Professor Shackle from UC Davis is doing some testing of closed loop irrigation for almonds, which is pretty exciting. And so he's having the sensors kind of tell the irrigation system when to irrigate, and that seemed to work pretty well. There were some hiccups, as there always are, but I guess he'll probably present that on the almond conference coming up. Another question, how frequently does it need to be replaced? So we've the sensors, we recommend them for one growing season. So what we ask our customers to do is to install the sensors at the beginning of the growing season, and that they'll work well for that season. Then at the beginning of the new season, we recommend using new sensors. You can reuse them if you want, but that's not really covered under warranty. And it is because the reuse method is a little challenging, and the sensors can break, or they might just not work as well the next time they're installed. And again, we are trying to make the sensors as bulletproof as possible. And so a lot of the work right now is going into that, trying to make them as reusable as possible, to make that method as consistent as possible. But it just depends on what your goals are, right? So if you're a grower that just needs to have like accurate results, period, then a new sensor is kind of the most straightforward way to achieve that. If you're a scientist and you have more time that you want to tweak and play around and see if things work well, then you can definitely do that and just kind of try reducing the sensor. So in terms of replacement, again, just kind of once a year, I would say, but it's still kind of being developed. Let's see. So then Maria Chiara Fusco is asking on citrus reticulata for 2 years of observations, why the probes no longer respond correctly to normal plant health behavior at the end of the irrigation season, right? And so yeah, so this, it could be a few things, right? If the sensors are installed at the beginning of the season, then you expect to have good results. Beyond that first season, you might not see good results. And this is, we have seen this because the trees seem to kind of close the wound over time, particularly over the winter. And so we have seen this in almond, where the sensors will work well for a season, but then the next season, if we just leave them installed, the data will be shrunk. So the tree might be reading like minus 15 bars, and the sensor might only be reading 10, because the connection between the sensor and the tree is not as good. And so then that's why we recommend either putting new sensors in or reinstalling the same sensor into a new site. One comment on the reinstallation: you will need to get a new sleeve, because the sleeves, the way they're installed, the nails that kind of attach them, they break when you remove them. So you will need, so for reinstallation, you always need a new sleeve, which we can provide. I mean, those are pretty inexpensive. And you also need to have a mating compound that is not dried out. So on that question, yeah, it could be because they were left over the winter, and so then the wound kind of closed up. And then, yeah, I mean, it's also one of these things where it's hard to say, right? Like the sensors have been tested in so many different crops, and so different crops have different behaviors and so forth. But generally, if you're not getting good results, it's because that connection is not very good, because either the plant closed up or the plant put out some wounding response, kind of gels. And so this is why we kind of recommend the sensors be tested in every crop before they're kind of used heavily. And so yeah, and so then also in terms of the citrus and of the summer, and yeah, also in citrus, you know, we're kind of tweaking things, and so it could be just we're still trying to figure that out. It could be something with the wounding response. It might be that the wounding response changes depending on what specific type of citrus you're testing. And so this is why, you know, that just dealing with biology can be pretty challenging. One station, don't receive any data for a couple of months. If you guys have problems with stations and data loggers and so forth, you know, we have our staff that'd be happy to help you with that. And so just reach out, honestly. We have a good amount of staff now, and they're happy to help out. And, you know, if you bought something and it doesn't work like as intended, then we will work with you to fix that. Like we understand, you know, the sensors, they work really well, but sometimes they don't. And so when they don't, we stand behind our product. And so we want to work with you to either provide you a replacement or that sort of thing, help you fix it. We can't fix things if we don't know about it. So definitely let us know. And either Mary Rose or Brian will help you with that. Let's see, what else do we have here? Other questions. We intend to connect it to our controllers and remote stations. Yeah, so in terms of connecting it to third-party data loggers, you can use our SDI tool version that will work with most loggers. We've had good results with like Davis Systems, with WiseCon, with let's see, there's been a number of loggers that we tested with that, and that works pretty well. So SDI 12 should work with most things out there. We have a question of, if a sensor stops measuring, is there a way to recalibrate the sensor in the lab to reinstall it? Let's see. So it depends on why it stopped measuring. I would recommend you check out our sensor reuse manual, which there's gonna be a link. Well, there's a link on our website and the resources, so you can see it there. But also when we send out the slides, there will be a link in the slides to the sensor reuse manual and the reuse video. So that kind of goes through the different reasons why sensors will not work well. And again, we're trying to make these as reliable as possible, but the sensors can fail in different ways. Sometimes they break, like the electronics break, and if that happens, then I mean the sensor's shot. That's part of the reason why we don't really guarantee sensor reuse, because they can break during reinstallation. The sensors can also stop responding if they get blocked with wounding gels or something along those lines of grease. That can sometimes be fixed if you can sand the sensor surface and test it in the lab. So the sensor reuse manual in the video kind of go over that, ways that you can test the sensor. Well, when you're testing the sensor in the lab, you're basically looking at a few different things. And again, this is in the manual, but you're looking at to see that the sensor is actually uh, has a stable response, where it's just, at least when it's in water, it should be measuring 0 relatively consistently. You're also measuring that the sensor, well, you're also testing that the sensor responds to being dried out. And so we show a way of doing that where the sensor is kind of exposed to air, and then you should see a response where the sensor is reading lower, more negative water potentials. And then you put it back in water, and you kind of see the sensor relax back. And then we also go through a process for sanding the pores on the top, which can help if the sensor is too slow, if it responds but too slowly. Another way the sensors can fail, right, and it's just lots of things here. It's in the sensor cavitates, where the water inside the sensor basically evaporated or breaks. If this happens, the sensor kind of shot. There might be a way to refill them, but it requires a lot of specialized equipment. So right now, that's kind of how it works. We're kind of working with a distributor to find a way to refill cavitated sensors. But I mean, the sensors should never cavitate unless they're exposed to air for a long time. Well, for a couple of minutes. So you always want to keep them in water, prevent them from cavitating. Let's see, there was something else there. Another thing, I mean, the sensors themselves also have some sort of lifetime, even if everything's done perfectly. The way we've achieved sensors that can measure really negative water potentials, right? Like the typical tensiometers, they will go to maybe -1 bar, maybe of tension. Then you have some extended range, which I haven't really seen a lot commercially, but they seem to be going a little bit higher than that. Our sensors can measure down to -35, right? So we have potentially, sensors that are 30 times more, have a 30 times higher range than typical tensiometers. And how we've achieved this is by using these nanoporous silicon. You can read my thesis if you're if you want to see how this is done. But the nanoporous silicon allows us to measure really, really high tensions. But the challenge, though, is that it does seem to have some sort of limited lifetime, where the pores will degrade over time. And so what can happen is that the sensor itself, the pores can break over time, and then the sensor will not respond at all. And so again, this is just we have the sensor, we're selling it the way we can, given the constraints, right? So when we try to we want to be very transparent about how the sensor works, and the pros and cons of using it, so that ideally our customers have a good experience, right? And so this is why we want to be very careful with who we sell and how we sell things, to ensure that you'll have a good results and the right expectations. Okay, then do you have a device that can be used for testing the probes before installation in the tree to be sure it is well calibrated, especially for the one we reuse, right? So you're asking about testing the sensors before actually reusing them in the tree. Because yeah, I mean, when you get the sensors from us, I would say they don't really need to be calibrated or tested or anything. We tested them right before we ship them to you. So I mean, if we ship them to you and they arrive and there's water in that capsule, the sensor should be good to go. But yeah, if you're reusing them, then you should test them. This is where, again, the sensor reuse manual and video would be very helpful. Take a look at those. So we don't have a device that you can use for testing them, but you can connect them to your own data logger to do that. All you need is, the main thing you need is a data logger. that can read the data in real time. So you can see the sensor responding right away. I mean, you need to be able to see the data like every second. And so we've had good results with the Campbell Scientifics, but anything that can read the sensor will do. And then you can do these testing in the lab. And so then, yeah, then you can test the sensor for stability and for response. Because obviously it sucks if you install them and then they don't work. Okay, so now we have, so I don't know, keep adding questions. You know, if I see more questions in the chat, I'll respond to them right away. We can make this more conversational. And if I don't see your question, post it again. We'll just keep going. But I have a list of questions that we got through the registration, so we're just gonna go through them now. Here's a list, but then, so we have, let's see, question, how do I deal with the varying bark thickness to get comparable silent depths, right? So when you're installing in different trees or different vines or whatever, the thickness of the bark will change. You know, it'll vary dramatically from almost no bark to really thick barks. And we came up with a way to deal with this, which is just kind of the way the sensor is installed. So what you're doing is you're basically hammering the sensor until the sleeve stops going in. Or if you're using the smaller sensors, then you're clamping it. And again, you just hammer it until it stops going in, because if we look at the this graph on the right side, the trees or the vines have the xylem, which is really hard, and then they have the phloem, which is much softer. And so we take advantage of that, so that the sleeve, as it goes in, it'll go in easily through the phloem, but then it'll stop at the xylem because it's much harder. There's this step here that will stop it at the right depth. And that generally works well. One failure mode that we've seen is people don't really install it deeply enough, because they just think like the sleeve just needs to go in until it's kind of covered by the bark or the phloem. And no, you really have to keep going until it stops going in, until the force becomes really, really difficult to get it to go in any further. And then let's see. So we had a question about the lifespan of the sensors. We kind of went through that, but yeah, we guarantee for one growing season. We have seen them last up to 3 years installed, but it's really uncertain. We saw that basically in grapes, where the sensors seem to work well for 3 years. But again, to get the best results, most of our testing has been done installing new sensors at the beginning of the growing season. Yeah, they can be damaged by winter temperatures or blocked by wounding responses. Yeah, so in terms of citrus, yeah, we've had good results internally, but then our customers have run into issues. So, and we're still trying to figure out what's up with that. It's one of those things, right? When you're testing in all these different crops, it just kind of takes a while. It seems to be something to do with wounding response. And, when you say citrus, that's a big genre of plants. And so it seems that it might depend also on the specific type of citrus that you're testing on. So if you want to use it in citrus, I would say be careful. The results are kind of uncertain at this point. And then how many years can the sensor install working in the vine trunk, and it can survive in the winter, right? So we guarantee it for one season, but we recommend we basically say 1 year. The sensors can survive about down to 0 degrees Celsius, but we're testing, they might be able to survive a little bit lower than that, but that's still being tested. We got a question in Spanish. Can you change the sensors from one plant to another? Pueden los sensores cambiarse de una planta a otra. And I speak Spanish, so if y'all, whatever, I can help out with that. So yeah, can you change from plant to plant? I mean, you can, but we just don't recommend it, because the installation is, you are making a wound into the plant, and then it takes at least a day or two for the sensor to start reading properly. And every time you move them, you run the risk of breaking the sensor and so forth. So we don't recommend them moving too much. You can try, but you might run into problems that way. Potential limit the sensor should not cross. And then I'm not really sure about the rest of the question. So yeah, we guarantee the sensor to measure down to minus 35 bars. And that's because that is what we test. We test that every sensor can go down to minus 35 bars. They can often measure lower water potentials, but yeah, below this threshold, you kind of just run the risk of the sensor cavitating. Yeah, and so if let's see, to give you guys more detail on that, our record testing sensors in the lab is 110 bars of tension that we have seen with some sensors. But if you try to go that far, you definitely cavitate. Most, sensors can often make it down to minus 50, 60 bars. But again, if you go down that low and if you leave them there down low, then you're just more likely to cavitate. The way the sensors work, the cavitation is what you would call stochastic, which is kind of random. And so then, but you have higher chance of cavitation as you go lower and lower, more negative water potential. We're working with our distributor LaFerrere to set up a filling station or kind of a refurb station for sensors. That's still being developed, and we'll see how well that works because it is kind of challenging to refurb sensors, and they do have kind of limited lifespan at the moment. Let's see. So we have another. Somebody mentioned, yeah, you can test the sensors with a CR1000 data logger. And then, yeah, so I mean, the sensor offset, there's some comments about the sensor offset. It can, I mean, when we send them to you, it's pretty stable and that seems to work well. But if you're kind of reinstalling them and tweaking things, the sensor offset might change. And so then you can correct for that by just moving, the offset is basically what the sensor reads when it's at 0 bar, when it's at 0 bars or in water. But yeah, sensors that can change sometimes, especially if you're moving the sensors a lot. Wait, let's see. And so let's see. And then reliability, guaranteed for 1 growing season. That's just because of the way sensor works. Battery consumption. The analog sensors use very, very little power. It's basically a 2 kilo ohm resistor powered by 1 volt. And then you only need to power them when you're measuring them. So it's very low. The SDI 12 versions, I believe is 1 milliamp or it could be lower. I need to look into that again. I kind of don't have the data like right away. But you can cycle them on and off. The data logger is solar powered. The price, email us for a quote. We don't have like published prices, and that's because we have distributors and different places, and so the pricing will depend on and that sort of thing. I mean, we just that's just kind of how it works out. But yeah, contact us for a quote. Maintenance, yeah, install it for growing season. You can check our sensor reuse manual. Can it be used in lettuce? And so not in lettuce. I mean, probably not. I'm not super familiar with lettuce. Probably because like where would you install it in the lettuce? I'm not really sure. And also because the water potentials in lettuce, I would imagine, would be very, very wet. So the current sensors might not have enough resolution for that. I could be wrong. We are developing a soils version of the sensor that could work for this crop. So I guess stay tuned. Sensors record water potential. What is the product range tested on? We showed kind of the list of crops. Is it available in South Africa? So we sell directly anywhere in the world, but we have distributors in some places. And so, if we have, yeah, and then you can ask us. If you email us, if we have a distributor, we'll let you know in that country. I mean, we try to work with through our distributors where we have them because it's just kind of easier and it's just better for the customers. Shipping things internationally gets a little complicated. So yeah, so we have them, and definitely contact us for that. Can you provide guidance in installing FloraPulse on vegetable plants such as potatoes? I mean, so that's super familiar with the potato plant, right? But we are developing sensors for smaller stems. I just kind of off the top of my head, I believe potatoes might be too small. I don't think you want to install it in the potato itself. That would be an interesting experiment, I suppose. So it's hard to say. The soil sensor could work. Well, definitely would work in the potatoes in the sense of like you could put it in the soil. But like in a new crop, yeah, you would need to trial it. We had good results initially in pepper. So, and now that we have these smaller sensors and we have partners to test them and we're kind of developing it and it's a big push in our company, then we will have more to say about these smaller plants. And so, yeah, so actually, we're looking to do lots of testing in small crops, small stem crops, basically anything that has a commercial potential where it could be used commercially. So if you have anything in mind or access to any of these crops, let us know. We'd love to work with you. If this makes sense for the proposal that we have currently using, then it might be covered by the USDA. So let us know if you have anything where we could test it. Great. Minimum diameter required. The current sensors are 50 millimeters, right, or 2 inches, and this is because if the plant is too small, then you run into problems where the wound is too big, and then the accuracy suffers sometimes a lot. And so then, but yeah, the new Small Pro we expect should work for crops that are about half an inch, potentially even smaller, but this is still kind of being developed. All right, so then let's see. For grapevines, it works quite well. We've had good results. It does require vines that are 2 inches or larger. The new small version might work for smaller vines, and it's worked well so far. But again, testing. Question about the relation of FloraPulse readings with leaf and stem water potential, soil moisture, and evapotranspiration, right? And so as I wrote here, the sensors, I mean, they generally track stem water potential, right? And they read pretty similarly. But I mean, I think it's important to notice that it's not the exact same measurement. It's not measured in the same place. And it's also a different instrument. And you have a biological system. So I wouldn't expect to read like 100% agreement all the time, but the trend is always is very, very good, especially in the crops that we validated. So yeah, so it works pretty well compared to stem water potential. But if you talk about these other things like leaf water potential, the relationship between leaf and stem water potential depends on the crop. And there had been some research where they got a relationship that you can convert between them. I believe in grape, maybe in other crops. But those are like two different measurements, and so that's going to change, and also depending on the crop, it's going to change. Then if you try to compare between soil moisture and evapotranspiration, that's like a whole can of worms. That you can have all sorts of relationships there. Like for instance, the soil moisture will be relatively stable, it'll be dropping somewhat, but then the water potential will go up and down once a day. And likewise, evapotranspiration will depend heavily on the crop and so forth. So this is why people like the tensiometer or the water potential or the pressure chamber, is because it gives you the water potential of the, like the thirst of the crop. Whereas if you're looking at soil moisture and evapotranspiration, those might change kind of independently of the water potential of the plant. So let's see here. Next question. Have you ever used FloraPulse in kiwi? One of our customers tested it in kiwi and they kind of had mixed results. So we're still trying to figure out what's up with that crop. We just don't have access to kiwi easily where we're located. We sent out some sensors for testing in kiwi to our collaborator in Chile. So we'll see how that goes, and then we can keep tweaking things there. Yeah, is it sensitive to water potential values lower than 5 megapascals, 0.5 megapascals? Yes, I mean, let's see, the sensors, the accurate, the resolution of the sensor is definitely, half a bar or better. So you have no problem there below 5 bars. But then we have seen though that when the trees are very close to zero, then the sensors might not respond as well. So it's just something to keep in mind. These are things that we're still kind of improving on. Somebody asked about how the sensors are being used. So we have, I would say kind of two main markets, right? One of them is scientists, and then the other one is growers. So scientists are using things for, validation of new crops, testing new crops. We've had lots of interest in forestry to try to better understand the ecosystem and how the trees are responding to drought and then dry, hot environments. We have researchers in the Amazon. We have researchers that have been going up 30 feet plus high up in the canopy for installing sensors, looking at water savings. There's lots of interest in water savings in Europe specifically, also in California. Big push to be more efficient with our water. Testing in the laboratory, and some scientists even use it just to keep their trees alive, which has been pretty interesting. Just kind of choosing when to irrigate. Growers, we've had lots of growers in California, some growers in Chile. We're expanding that to let's see, Europe a little bit and Australia a little bit. We have some distributors in New Zealand recently, which is very exciting. And so yeah, so and growers use it to basically give them peace of mind, keep the trees happy, that sort of thing. I think that's it for the questions we had. So if there's any other questions, pull them up. Otherwise, we can just call this up. So yeah, I guess I'll just stay on the line for another minute or so, see if there's any more questions put in the chat. If not, thank you so much for joining in. I really appreciate you guys working with us on this. I mean, we're trying real hard to make these sensors work as best as possible, and I think that we've had good success with that. But we're still it's still kind of a work in progress in some crops. And so yeah, and we will be sharing these slides and probably as well a recording of this meeting. So okay, looks like no more questions. Okay, well then with that, thank you so much everyone for joining in. Yeah, we'll be in touch and let us know if any more questions, any maintenance requests or challenges that you're having. Let us know. Again, we stand behind our product, and we'll do what needed to make things right. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye.